This will be part 1 of my Outlander Blood of My Blood Season 1 Episode 2 review titled Sealed with a Kiss. As always, this will have spoilers for the books and the TV show, so if you were looking to avoid those, please do keep on scrolling. So we open Episode 2 with Henry, who is on the Western Front during World War I in Passchendaele, Belgium, and the year is 1917. This will help orient us in the timeline because Claire is born in October of 1918. So his and Julia's love affair happens in pretty short order here. We immediately get a sense of just how horrible and gruesome this battle and war has been for Henry and all of the men on the front lines. And I've always felt that Outlander is sneaky good at depicting World War I and World War II scenes. I think the way they dress them is beautiful. I think the way they're shot is incredible, and it feels very visceral and real. And so we as viewers are immediately thrown into the thick of what Henry has been dealing with day in and day out on the front lines. We see the dirt, we hear the sounds, we can tell that men are retreating, how dirty it is, how gruesome it is, and how real it is for all of these men. And we immediately clock Henry in the midst of it all, looking at his watch. He is searching for one of his men, and he asks around who was the last man to see Private Charlton. He asks his captain if he can go back and get Private Charlton because he knows where he is, and the boy is very young and very brave, and the captain immediately denies him and tells him to withhold. One of the key pieces of dialogue that I clocked here is that Henry tells him, "I promised my men that I wouldn't leave anyone behind this time." To me, with that one line, we can understand that he has gone out with his men many times and lost many men already. So when his orders were to stand down and then you see him count 2-3 on his watch before he goes after Private Charlton, I was not surprised. It is clear as we watch him navigate his way through and out of the trenches that he is very familiar with the patterns of the opposition, how long to wait in order to go out there in heavy gunfire. And we do see that he's able to find his man and return him to the trenches like he said he could. This entire scene to me is where I immediately started to recognize Claire in Henry and vice versa, because Claire is of the mind that she will not leave one person behind if she is able to save them. And that's both physically retrieving them and also medically saving them. So when we see Henry holding himself over Private Charlton's body and trying to calm him down as he is essentially dying in his arms, I recognized so many scenes where we saw Claire doing the same thing. One that just pops to mind right now is during the hunt when she goes to the aid of the man who ends up getting killed by the boar. This may not lead to anything, but I thought it was interesting that this man's name is Willie, and Jamie's older brother's name is Willie. And just like Claire had done so many times, we see Henry trying to calm Willie by telling him that it's just a blighty wound and it's enough to get him sent home. A blighty wound is a non-fatal wound, so he's lying to him, trying to comfort him, even though he knows that it is definitely a fatal wound here. And you have to imagine that in this young boy's final moments, it was a comfort to him that someone like Henry took the time to save him and make sure that he would be taken care of and returned home to his mother. And not dissimilarly to Claire, he did do something that was in direct opposition of his captain and could have gotten himself killed. But in return, it demands the respect of all of the other men, and you can tell that Henry is someone who is respected by these men instantly by his actions and how he carries himself. For me, this opening scene was a parallel to the opening scene we have of Claire when she is in the middle of the battle and she's completely calm, cool, collected amongst all of this chaos, and she puts her head down and she does the right thing and she goes to work. And we see that Henry has been doing that day in, day out, and they have that similarity between them. And that comes at a really grave cost. And it seems like Willie's death is the impetus for Henry to write a letter to no one and not to his brother. And I love that we get the voiceover of his thoughts that he's putting down to paper here. And it's beautiful writing. I think it's so poignant and representative of the real life letters that came from the front lines that the women in the redaction office would have read, and really depicts strongly the horrors of war and being in the position he was in at that time. One of the more heartbreaking lines to me is men who once laughed and loved lie beside boys who didn't have time to do either. And they are buried together in a bloodied bit of foreign soil, and we see all of these crosses laid out across the battlefields here. We see that his letters are going to be registered under the number 99, which comes up later when we are with Julia in the redaction office. One of the lines of dialogue here that overlay this scene is Henry saying that it is possible to overcome physical pain, but an injured mind he fears is irreparable. I feel this is important going into watching him on screen because he already knows at this point that his mind has been broken. And as Henry drafts this letter, we can see it taking its journey, finding its way to Julia. Right here, we can see that it is in this horse-drawn buggy here with the letters FPO. This usually means Fleet Post Office. And in the voiceover, we see that Henry is questioning not how or when he will die, but why he will die. What is the purpose of this war and his death? What meaning will it have? And so to make himself feel better about it, he writes as a witness of what is happening to let the world know what he's seen as someone who took part in this war. And these letters are something that you can find now and read, and many of the men who were on the front lines and on the Western Front had very similar sentiments to Henry in this dialogue, because they wrote home to people in England to let them know that they were doing their best, they were fighting their best, and it was a losing battle for them. And I loved the line that fear is a powerful poison, because I think that that will be something that continues to be a through line throughout this season. And so by the time Henry finishes penning his letter, we are arriving alongside it to the War Office in London where Julia Morriston works. Since we have viewers have already clocked that the number 99 was the bag that Henry's letter arrived in, we immediately start to look for it in this arrival. And we very quickly find Julia Morriston taking a break from reading to read something else, which we learn is a biochemistry textbook. So fans of Claire will immediately clock that as yet another thing to tie her to her mother, an interest that they both shared. Julia's supervisor then places a piece of paper on her desk and it says their new assignments. And very quickly it is covered in tea and ruined. Julia then exhibits kind of a skill of a photographic memory here and immediately writes down what was on the page that she read for mere seconds beforehand. And in these very quick moments with her, you can clock that she's a very intelligent woman. And because we received subliminally 2 key pieces of information when we were with Henry on the front lines, we know that he is in Passchendaele and we know that he is in regiment number 99. So when Julia is writing it down out loud, we can hear her say those 2 things in order, and we know now that she will be looking at Henry's letters. Julia is caught having a pamphlet here for the women suffragettes on her desk, and her supervisor dissuades her from being so open about it. And they mention the hunger strikes and a woman named Emily Davison. The real Emily Davison was arrested 9 times, went on a hunger strike 7 times, and was force-fed on 49 different occasions. And just like Julia says in this dialogue, she died after walking out onto the middle of a horse race and being run over by King George V's horse. Julia tells her supervisor that she's very proud of the work that we are doing, implying that she's already a member of this group. And like she says in the dialogue, women of that time were turning the tables and changing the narrative around their movement because they became so heavily involved in the war efforts. Her hope is that she'll one day be admitted to university after the war is over, and we learn later on in the episode that she prolonged her education in order to join up on the war efforts. And I love that this is so important to her because her daughter ends up going to school and becoming a surgeon. So even though we might not have her be able to follow through on that dream, it's nice that even without knowing it, Claire kind of takes the torch from her and follows through with it. We also get our first name drop of Scotland when Julia refers to the Edinburgh Seven, and they were there to study medicine. Then we finally see Julia going through the letters on her desk and making her redactions. I really loved grabbing this screenshot and actually reading through the letter. The second half of it is here, and it's from a brother to his brother telling him he's glad he has left because they lost a lot of men in their frontline trenches and that he's grateful that he's not there anymore. The voiceover of all the different men talking as we see all the letters spread out on the desk I think is brilliant because you can tell that these men are writing to their mothers, their brothers, their siblings, and even one man who's writing to his daughter Phyllis. I think the overlapping voices is extremely poignant and gives insight into the things that are floating around in all of these women's heads day in, day out as they read them. And we see the voices fade when Julia reaches for Henry's letter. Come back